Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Viper Strike 95, and welcome to our Friday stream here for our next game day flight. Today, we're here in beautiful southern England. We're in the city of Plymouth, and today we're here to cover our next game day flight. And we're covering one of the biggest games in the English football calendar, the North London Derby between Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur, of course. Huge derby has been around since the 1880s. These two North London giants have been a very important part of the game for generations, of course. But one of the things about this derby, though, is it's really bitter. They're not very far apart, and more importantly, too, these are two of the biggest clubs in the city of London. Along with Chelsea, they are probably the big three clubs in England's capital. In the nation's capital, London. So before we get started, I do want to say hello to everyone in chat and all the lurkers. I hope you're all having a good day here today. So here's our flight plan for this afternoon stream, of course. We'll start our trip from Plymouth. We'll be making our way down from Plymouth. We'll make our way down over to Plymouth, in downtown Plymouth. We'll fly over the home of Plymouth Argyle. And we'll fly into Plymouth, England. Then from there, we'll fly north over Dartmoor National Park. We'll make our way over to Exeter. We'll make our way over to Exeter, where Exeter Cathedral is at. And then we'll make our way to our very first stop. And we'll make our first stop here, and then we'll turn right. And we'll make our first stop here in Bournemouth. Bournemouth will be our first stop of the day in beautiful Bournemouth. So that will be our first leg of a trip. Leg 2 will take us from Bournemouth. We'll make our way north into Southampton. We'll fly over one of England's largest ports at St. Mary's Stadium, home of Southampton FC. Then we'll turn east into Portsmouth to visit their infamous rival, Southampton. Portsmouth, home of Portsmouth FC. We'll fly over the historic dockyard and all that. Then we'll head over for east. We'll make our way into Worthington in Brighton, the famous beachside community here in southern England. And then make our way up to American Express Stadium, home of Brighton and Hove Albion, the Seagulls. And we'll land here at Swanborough Farm Airstrip for our second stop. For our third and final leg, of course, we'll head up north. We'll visit Waypoint 13 to visit Brighton's hated rival, Crystal Palace, the defending FA Cup winners. Then we'll go all the way up into London, of course. We'll fly over the Kia Oval, make our way through Westminster. We'll make our way through Westminster Abbey, Big Ben, the London Eye. If you guys want to, we can. I also picked a flight through Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, London Eye, and we'll fly our way through London, including the Tower of London, before flying back north into Emirates Stadium. We'll fly over Emirates Stadium, of course, the home of Arsenal. And we'll also fly over Highbury Square. This used to be the home of Arsenal, Highbury Square, the old home for Arsenal from 1919 to 2004. And then we'll make our way north to visit the home of Tottenham Hotspur, the brand new state-of-the-art Hotspur Stadium in nearby White Hart Lane, the old ground. And we'll make our final landing here at Stapleford Airport, Echo Golf Sierra Golf. So, yeah, quite a bit of stuff here in this flight plan, of course. Plenty of stuff here. We're going to do some flying this afternoon. This is a lot of stuff for this flight plan. It's going to have plenty of stuff going for it. So we're taking the Pipistrel Virus. I haven't actually flown this thing in FS24, so this will be my first time flying the Pipistrel Virus SW121. This is a really interesting plane. I flew this plane quite a bit during FS20, but this is a really cool light aircraft. It was built in Slovenia in Italy and sold as an ultralight, home-built kit, glider, or light sport aircraft. And these things have been produced since 1999. Over 1,000 have been built. The S121 that we see here featuring a 100 horsepower Rotax engine. And the SW10912 can actually go up to 780 nautical miles, which is pretty impressive. And it can go to a cruise speed of 147 knots, which is plenty quick. Of course, we're not going to go nearly as fast in this thing today, but we're going to have some pretty good time with all of it. So let's go ahead and turn her on. She should be pretty easy to get going, of course. Apparently, this is some sort of bug with this virus, so I'll have to start somewhere else. Here. Yeah, it's a bug. I can't get it started. Hey, Chavez, good to see you. I hope you're doing well. Apparently my virus has a bit of a bug. If you park in an area where it's shut down, it won't be able to start the engine. So we're gonna get back to the right direction soon. So okay. Everything works pretty good. Everything works the way it should. Okay. So we got into an area where it starts, so the first leg into Dartmoor will be 3,000 feet. I guess I'm gonna head back we're gonna head back the way we came. So we're gonna start 1,500 feet above sea level. And we're up. Yeah, this little virus is a neat little plane. Haven't flown it much in 24, so this would be a really neat plane for the south coast of England. We're gonna be. So we're heading down to Plymouth, of course. So the famous thing about the city of Plymouth, of course, we'll be heading down there. This port city here in England dates back to the Bronze Age. It's the most popular area in Devon, in southwest England. It was a major role in English history because Plymouth was where the English fleet was based when they defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. And Plymouth was the departure point for a lot of pilgrims to the New World. So if you're wondering why Plymouth, England got its name, if you wonder why Plymouth got its name in Massachusetts, well, that's because it's named after here, Plymouth, England. And if you wonder how that relates to the Derby and all that, well, we're starting here in Plymouth, but there was an issue. Yeah, it's a little pipistrel. Neat little plane. The Virus is a fascinating little plane. So Virus, really interesting plane, of course. Neat little ultralight. The Pipistrel, very neat little ultralight. I like this thing a lot. I haven't done much flying with it, so this would be a really good opportunity to take some flying with this plane. So I'm going to sit around 120 knots. 120, 125 knots. Not going to go super fast with it, just going to be big cruising. I want some bit of speed, obviously. So over here, of course, is the Tamar Bridge. So that is our landmark. So we'll get this back. But Plymouth is a neat little port town. I would like to visit more of England, of course. But Plymouth was bombed quite a bit during World War II, and it took quite a bit of years to rebuild this area. But Plymouth is still historically very important culturally. Some of the landmarks here in this city included the Royal Citadel that was built in the 1660s. You have the Elliott Terrace that was built. You have the new Ronald Levesque building for the University of Plymouth. And the National Marine Aquarium, which is the largest aquarium in the United Kingdom. So, definitely some pretty famous people here in Plymouth. Hey, Mrs. TBHI, good to see you, my dear. I hope you're doing well. Upside down as usual, I see. But we're not going to do much upside down flying here today on my channel. I'm not Murphy. I'm not crazy enough to fly upside down. So we're about to visit Plymouth here. The stadium we'll be flying to first would be the home of their football club, Plymouth Argyle. They're in the third tier this year. They got relegated last year out of the EFL Championship. They were second to last year. And now they're going to be playing in League One. Plymouth Argyle. So there's Plymouth Argyle's home ground here in Plymouth, of course. But our stream today, TPHI, is the North London Derby between Spurs and Arsenal and Spurs. Should be an excellent matchup, of course. These should be a big game, of course, this year. So we're going to take an image here. But beautiful port town, though, in Plymouth. Pretty interesting port town, of course. I wanted to do South England since I think it'll be a really scenic flight to the south coast. And I actually visited the south coast of England a few times. Once into Southampton, and we'll be visiting Southampton a bit more when I head in April. Of course, I'll be visiting Southampton again. This time, we spent a whole 2 or so days in Southampton. Maybe I might even spend a day here in Plymouth. Maybe not Plymouth. Portsmouth should be really interesting. I would love to visit Portsmouth for its naval stuff. Lots of naval history in Portsmouth. So we'll climb up to 3,000 feet. So we'll climb up. So let's go ahead and talk about our derby here today. The North London Derby is going to be our matchup. This historic derby clash between the two big clubs in northern London, Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur, is one of the biggest in all of England, of course. Is one of the most watched derbies in the entire world because obviously you got two massive fan bases in the nation's capital. Although they first played back in 1887, the North London Derby, however, gained even more significance in 1913 when Arsenal moved into North London from their old ground of Woolwich, which was south of the River Thames. Of course, these two teams have played 198 times, and the club that had the most wins was Arsenal with 85. Then Tottenham won then Spurs won 61, and then 52 draws between the two sides. So this was pretty evenly matched, but mostly Arsenal has historically had more success than Spurs have been. Of course, some of the more interesting matches that have happened in this derby included the famous game in White Hart Lane in 1971 when Arsenal won the league and their invincible campaign in 2004 for the Gunners, for some of the more notable ones. But this was definitely a very intense, passionate derby, and like I said, they're not far from each other. So the history of this iconic derby, of course, was a friendly match in 1887. This was the first time these two giants have met. And back in the old days, the Arsenal was actually known as the Royal Arsenal, which was in Plumstead. It was played at Spurs Ground at Tottenham Marshes, which was actually abandoned 15 minutes before the end due to darkness, and Spurs won 2-1. Of course, they played in quite a few friendlies. However, the proper rivalry did not begin until 1913, when Arsenal moved from South London to North London at Highbury, just 4 miles straight from Tottenham's White Hart Lane, the old home of Spurs. A move that's very much resented by the Tottenham fans because they consider Highbury to be part of their territory, and thus formed a natural local rivalry between these two clubs. And it's still going on right now. Of course, their first matchup as the two rivals occurred on August 22nd, 1914 at White Hart Lane. And it was mainly done during a Warley Front friendly. And even though Arsenal were second division at the time and Tottenham was first, the Gunners absolutely smacked Spurs 5-1 in that game. And thus they would go on to meet regularly during the First World War. However, what truly set the rivalry to what it was today was, of course, in 1919, when after the First World War, the First Division of England was to be expanded by two different teams, and the league held a meeting of the clubs to decide which the two clubs by mean of vote. 19th place Chelsea actually had a vote and were allowed to stay. Thus, they took the first of the two spots, so the second spot had to be awarded to a 20th place team. Could have been awarded to 20th place Tottenham or Barnsley, which, by the way, is in South Yorkshire, who finished third in second division. But Arsenal also bid for the place despite finishing 6th in the second division, although an error was actually in 5th. After endorsement by the league president and chairman of Liverpool at the time, John McKenna, on the count for their longer membership of the league, Arsenal won the vote by 18 votes to Spurs 8, which, by the way, those 8... Barnsley got 5 of the votes, Wolves 4, Nottingham Forest 3, Birmingham City 2, and Hull City with 1 vote. And Arsenal got to be in the first division of English football in 1919. And this absolutely infuriated the fans of Spurs and their supporters. In fact, they've been alleged that Arsenal chairman Sir Henry Norris used underhand dealings to bring this to happen, but nothing was proven. But this was absolutely enraging the Tottenham supporters, and that feeling has not been lost even after all these years. However, despite that setback, Tottenham was soon promoted back to the top flight as they won the second division title in 1919-20 season. And this was when the Derby became the first regular contested, of course. But before, I'm going to go ahead and look outside. So this is Dartmoor National Park here in England. This is Dartmoor, a beautiful national park here in southern England, of course. Beautiful Dartmoor, right in the Devon coast. One of England's more important natural areas, of course, as we speak. This national park is filled with wild open moorlands and deep river valleys, of course. Dartmoor has been a national park since 1951. Very cool little national park area here at Dartmoor. But yeah, absolutely stunning region. Stunning little park. So this is beautiful Dartmoor, and several films have been filmed here, most notably Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was actually hosted in this area. The Hounds of Baskerville, that was released by BBC, featured a Dartmoor-based animal testing center. And Hitman 3 even had a stage in this area. So, pretty neat little area though. Dartmoor is a really fascinating little park, as you guys can tell. But getting back to topic, of course, the first fully competitive derby matchup between after Arsenal's move was, of course, in 1921 when Arsenal, which Spurs actually were victorious 2-1 at White Hart Lane. And the early matches between the two were known for their bitterness, and they became extremely bitter, of course. And one match in September 22 led to both clubs being censured by the Football Association and were threatened to be forced to play behind closed doors without their fans. Now, of course, Tottenham had a bit more consistency than Arsenal has been. You see, the thing about Arsenal is Arsenal have not been relegated since their promotion back in 1919. Because yes, the Gunners have the longest unrelegated streak in England. They have been part of the first division for over 100 years. Tottenham, however, was in second division for quite a few times between the periods of 1928-1933 and 1935 to 1950, which led to the number drop of the matches between the two clubs and the cooling of passions. One of those particular games was in 1935, which Arsenal gave Tottenham Spurs their biggest defeat at White Hart Lane, where they routed them 6-0. So the Gunners absolutely blasted the Spurs away completely in that game. Absolute beatdown, of course. However, relations between the two clubs did improve somewhat after the Second World War, after Tottenham allowed Arsenal to play their home matches at White Hart Lane, while Highbury was requisitioned as an ARP station, and it was bombed. The two sides did meet for the FA Cup for the first time in the 1948 season, and Arsenal beat them in a third round tie 3-0. However, things to this rivalry thankfully grew even more bigger, because since 1950, there's only been one season where Spurs and Arsenal have not been in the same division. That was 1977-78. I mean, these fixtures were pretty much regular, and this has maintained this rivalry to the present day. And there have been several notable matches since that era that have, and several times the course of a title or journey to a cup final has relied on this derby match. One of the very big ones, of course, was the FA Cup in 2014. It was a pretty big one. But one notable incident that happened during all this time was, of course, the transfer of Sol Campbell, who was a beloved player at Spurs, and he let his contract run out, and he could have joined any club, but no, he chose to be joining Arsenal. And Spurs fans call him Judas, because he crossed that infamous divide between White Hart Lane to Highbury. In 2014, Arsenal's Theo Walcott picked up an injury in the 83rd minute of the FA Cup against Tottenham in 2014, and he was pelted by a hail of coins and plastic bottles after coming off the field on a stretcher by Tottenham fans. And eventually it was a 2-0 scoreline for the Gunners, of course. Then in 2017, Tottenham beat Arsenal 2-0 in the final North London derby at White Hart Lane, and it guaranteed Tottenham to finish above Arsenal in the league for the first time in 22 seasons. And then they would achieve 6 straight finishes above their rivals from 2016-17 to 2021 in 2022. Which was a very big deal for the Spurs supporters. Nowadays, the Gunners have had much more success, considerably more success than the Spurs. And lastly, on July 31st, 2025, this past year, the first North London Derby was held outside the UK at Kai Tak Sports Park in Hong Kong as part of their preseason fixtures, which the Gunners won, which Tottenham was able to beat their hated rivals, the Gunners. So that concludes the history of our North London derby between these two North London giants, of course, the two giants of North London. Absolutely massive clubs, of course. Both have fans that stretch all across the globe. So we're going to go ahead and descend down to around 1500. But we're going to descend a little slowly. So a bit about our streams this week, of course, guys. We'll be back on Sunday. Our next stream after this one will be on Sunday. We'll be doing our next national park, Grand Teton in Wyoming. Should be absolutely gorgeous. If you guys never flew up to Grand Teton, I highly recommend it. We'll be starting our way into Wyoming, of course. We'll start at Uniform 06, make our way up to 46U in Alpine, and then we'll make our way up into Jackson Hole Airport. We'll fly around all the Grand Teton National Park areas in the range, and we'll make our way into Jackson Hole Airport, which is one of those stunning commercial airports in the country. It's a stunning place to do some general aviation flying, especially not just for GA, but it's especially stunning if you're flying an airliner. It's one of the prettiest airports in the country. And it's the only commercial airport in the national park. So I consider Grand Teton to be America's Innsbruck, if you know what I mean, because it's a national park. You're not getting very many areas as pretty as that. So I'm looking forward to our next national park journey. So very excited and very happy to be looking forward to all this. So we'll arrive in Exeter next. Our next destination is Exeter. Exeter, of course, in Devon. It was used about the Romans at the time as a base for Legio II Augusta, under the command of Vespasian. It became a religious center during the Middle Ages. It was home to the famous Exeter Cathedral, which was founded in the 11th century. It became a major center for the wool trade. And nowadays it's mainly used for education, business, and tourism here in this part of England. But very cool stuff. But of course, their top landmark is their famous cathedral, which was built all the way back from 1112 to 1400. It's a really stunning cathedral. Including, it even features the longest uninterrupted medieval stone vaulted ceiling in the world. Really beautiful stuff here. The cathedral in Exeter should be absolutely gorgeous, of course. Another really well-known building that is very popular, another landmark, is the house that moved. That was ironically built in the 14th century, but it got its famous name in 1961 when it was moved from its original location of Edmund Street to a new location, and it had to be strapped together and slowly moved a few inches. So yes, a literal house that moved. And more. But it's a really neat building, of course. So I wonder if we can get the Exeter Cathedral. I wonder if the cathedral is going to be a POI landmark here, because it's a very famous cathedral here in this part of England. So let's take a look. We'll be making our way, but like I said, England's got some really cool stuff, and I'm very excited to return back to England again, in the United Kingdom again, in April. Okay, Exeter Cathedral is not a POI landmark. Okay. So we'll turn right, and then we'll head over this area for the next 64 nautical miles. So this year, of course, is the Premier League, obviously. This year has been a very important one this year. So a bit of the table recap for this year's Premier League. Has been a really competitive one this year for English football. Of course, Spurs versus Gunners will be playing on Sunday, of course. Huge matchup. However, these two teams could not be in more different situations this year. For Arsenal, the road team, they're top of the league, 5 points ahead of Manchester City. In the top of the table. But they did draw the last 2 games on the schedule. They drew against Wolves. Unbelievably, they managed to draw against Brentford, and they drew against Wolves. So this was definitely not a time for the Gunners. But however, you could be worse, and the much worse situation has been the Spurs this year, who have had it rough this season. They've had a rough season for Spurs. They have absolutely struggled. In Europe, Spurs have done great in Europe. In fact, Spurs are actually in top 8 of the Champions League this year, and they're actually already in the top 8. But the Premier League, how about being 16th in the table? Spurs are 16th. Their last domestic win, they haven't won a league match since December 28th, 2025. They're 16th. They're just 5 points away from relegation. Do you guys even know how big this is if Tottenham somehow get relegated this year? It would be their first relegation since 1976-77. It would be their first relegation in over 50 years. And mind you, this is one of the big 6 clubs in England. The big 6 Premier League clubs. If they got relegated, it would absolutely be a massive relegation. It'd be one of the biggest relegations from the Premier League in a very long time. Not a great time to be a Spurs supporter, for sure. It's been very rough. And here's the thing, it's not even unlikely to happen. West Ham have won 3 of their last 5 matches in league play. They're 3 of the last 5 matches they have won in league play after having a rough start. For West Ham, if they could somehow get a win against Bournemouth, which is a possibility. The Bournemouth's playing quite well in the last 5 games, so I don't know what could happen. But if they do get a win, they might get out of relegation. It depends on how Forest and West Ham do. If Forest wins, Tottenham loses, and West Ham wins, then Spurs would only be 2 points from relegation, which would be absolutely insane to even think about. I don't think Spurs are going to get relegated, but anything can happen. So that's how I feel about it. Of course, the big one I do want to bring up, of course, is Everton. Their match will be on Monday, actually, against Manchester United versus Manchester United at Hill Dickinson. Oh boy, Manchester United are on a bleeping roll right now. They've been undefeated in their last couple matches. They're turned up a new leaf this year. But I mean, Everton are not doing bad. They're 8th, which is a big improvement over last season. So who knows? So that's why I'm saying Everton. That's why I'm saying this is a very big matchup this week. Of course, I do want to briefly talk about some bit of history with Arsenal for a bit, for the Gunners. So let's talk about, as we fly our way over to our first stop here in Bournemouth, I want to talk a bit about the Gunners, of course. One of the two clubs in this matchup this year is Arsenal Football Club. Simply known as the Arsenal FC, or the Arsenal Football Club, hailing all the way from North London, of course. They are one of England's biggest and most historic clubs. Domestically, they've won 13 league titles, including one of them being unbeaten in their legendary Invincible season. A record 14 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, 17 FA Community Shields, and a Football League Centenary Trophy. European-wise, however, they're not nearly as successful. They did win a European Cup Winners' Cup and the Interseas Fairs Cup. In terms of trophies won, Arsenal is England's third most successful club, only trailing Liverpool and Manchester United. So Arsenal deserve a lot of credit for being one of England's most successful clubs. In fact, one funny thing about Arsenal is that they're the first club from Southern England to actually join the Football League back in 1893, and they joined the First Division in 1904. Arsenal has a record too. They carried the longest active streak continuously in the top division, over 105 years since they've been reappointed back in the top flight in 1919, and has completed the 20th century with the highest average league position of any club. So definitely Arsenal has been England's club of consistency. They've always been super consistent. You know what you're getting for the Gunners, of course. So they have a very rich history as well. So the club was actually founded by munition workers at the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich. They founded the club as Dial Square. And then, of course, you all know, in 1913, the club crossed the sea to Arsenal's team in Highbury, becoming close neighbors of Spurs, and created the famous rivalry. But Arsenal had other innovations too, a lot of people didn't realize. They introduced the famous WM formation that has been a popular part of football or soccer, floodlights, and shirt numbers. So definitely very famous, and they're one of the world's most valuable football clubs, worth $3.4 billion. So very valuable club, rich history, an unbelievable passion, of course. The Gunners are steeped in history. Doesn't know where to begin, of course, when you talk about the mighty Arsenal Football Club. Here's the crazy thing. Then we have the famous crest of Arsenal. This was their old logo in the 1930s, of course. Of course, their first crest in 1888 featured the 3 cannons that was similar to the coat of arms of Woolwich. And they can be mistaken for chimneys, but the presence of the carved lion's head indicates that they are cannons. Of course, when the club moved to Highbury, they dropped it. And of course, they brought in a new logo with the cannon pointing eastward, with the club's nickname, the Gunners, inscribed alongside it. Of course, this one was used for... And then in 1949, they unveiled a new crest that was modernized, featuring the same style cannon below the club's name, set in black letter typography, and above it the coat of arms of the Metropolitan Borough of Islington, and a scroll that described the club's newly adopted Latin motto, Victoria Concordia Crescit. Victory comes from harmony. Of course, due to the fact the club had revisions on their crest multiple times, they couldn't copyright it. So they did have to make a change in 2002, and it's the crest they now wear nowadays. A more modern curved lines in a simplified style, which was copyrightable. And the cannon faces now to the east. So that is the one nowadays, of course. But the Gunners kit their crest and all that is one of the most iconic in world football. So Arsenal, definitely very famous. Now, of course, another thing that rivals Arsenal's historic crest and what makes them one of the most iconic is their colors. And their jersey is one of the most iconic in England, too. Their famous red shirt with white sleeves. And for much of their history, their home colours have been bright red shirt with white sleeves and shorts. But this was never always the case. The choice of red was actually due to the fact it was a recognition of the charitable donation from Nottingham Forest soon after their founding in 1886. But of course, the shirt you now know nowadays was actually established back in 1933 when Herbert Chapman, one of his players more distinctly dressed, updated the kit to add white sleeves and changed the shade of red to a brighter pillar box red. And this has been their uniform color ever since. The red and white shirt sleeves have come to define Arsenal ever since 1933. So they've always been wearing these colors for years, of course. And Arsenal's home colors have been inspiration for other clubs. Sparta Prague adopted a dark red kit like that. Hibernian adopted their designs for their green-white stripe. And of course, Sporting Club de Braga in Portugal was also founded with Arsenal's colors. For many years, the Gunners have worn either white or navy blue, but in 1968 the FA banned the navy shirts, so they introduced a away kit of yellow shirts with blue shorts. And that ended up being nearly as famous as their famous red and white home kit. So this was pretty much a lucky color, of course. When Nike took over from Adidas, Arsenal changed their colors to blue shirts and shorts. So, but yeah, basically they've always pretty much either wore the red and white. Home will always be a part of Arsenal's home colors. That part is not going to change no matter how much you guys want it to be, of course. So we'll go over to our slideshow, obviously. So let's take a break from talking and we'll just explore the South Coast. But man, is she pretty down here, guys. That's a beautiful South Coast here in England. So this is the Dorset National Landscape we're about to arrive into. Also, you guys are more than welcome to fly along. We're in the Southeast Asian server. We're more than welcome to. And here's our route. So, you guys are all more than welcome to fly along with us. But the scenery here is absolutely stunning this morning. This afternoon, of course. Stunning scenery. So we'll get through it pretty much easier. So for the flight sim communities, of course, along the community, in the community, of course, Two-Tone Murphy will be streaming again tonight. He'll be doing a corridor run from the Balkans. He'll be starting in Sofia, making his way through North Macedonia, then going all the way in. Then he would head down to Greece, and eventually end his way in Thessaloniki. From Sofia to Skopje, into Thessaloniki, of course. So it should be absolutely a really nice flight for Murphy and his crew. In addition to this, on Saturday as well, tomorrow, Alison Johnson will be back for another of her historical flight recreations. From Kulisuk to Reykjavik, should be a very stunning flight. A 4-hour flight, supposed to be. It is day 93 of her journey, of course. So it should be a really interesting plane, of course. Should be a really interesting flight. So yeah, she's getting closer to completing the series. So should be really interesting as well. So, pretty cool stuff, though. Definitely check out Allison. I would join. No worries, Mrs. TPHI. I completely understand you're working. That's understandable. Well, then you could just enjoy my stream, of course, and hope my voice sounds all right. So, about the Gunners as well, and one of the other more important things is they play at the Emirates Stadium, which has been their home since 2006. Emirates is their new modern ground, one of the most modern grounds in England. This home of the Gunners hosts 60,000 people. It's been home of Arsenal since 2006, and their women have been playing here since 2024. But one thing that makes this stadium very famous, of course, has been their pitch groundmanship, has been one of the best in football, leading it to be nicknamed the Carpet, of course. Since 2009, the stadium has went through Arsenalization, restoring visible links to Arsenal's rich history. The reason being when they originally built it, it didn't really have much of the feedback from the local supporters. So eventually they did this to make the stadium into a visible stronghold of all things Arsenal. As well, and try to make it more feel like the home of Arsenal. But it's a very beautiful and modern stadium, worthy of the Gunners, of course. Now, of course, this stadium is going to have future plans to actually expand the stadium. They may plan to do some renovations in the near future to expand this place from 60,000 to 70,000 people, with changes to the seating gradient. So yes, Emirates Stadium is going to have so it's going to be even bigger because Arsenal's a massive club and they're going to be absolutely huge. It's going to be a massive renovation, but it's also hosted not just sports, but concerts, conference centers, and of course, many more things. It's a great music venue too. But it's really cool though. I wanted to visit Emirates Stadium actually, really neat ground, and I do kind of like the Gunners a bit. Though that way too. So really cool stuff. Emirates Stadium is a really neat ground. Though I never got the chance to visit Emirates Stadium because it was a bit far away, so from our hotel. So we ended up choosing Chelsea Stamford Bridge. And don't worry about Chelsea supporters. We'll get to Chelsea in this series. It'll be bound to happen. Maybe next season I'll do Chelsea. It's just trying to keep things variety and all that, of course. Now, of course, Arsenal are very rich. They have tons of supporters. It makes sense because Arsenal's fan base is worldwide. Arsenal's fan base are referred to as the Gooners due to their club nickname, the Gunners. Virtually all home matches sell out, and in 2007-2008, they had the second highest league attendance for an English club. As well as in 2015, they still have the third highest attendance. And they have the seventh highest average attendance of all European clubs, which is extremely impressive considering The clubs behind them are Borussia Dortmund, FC Barcelona, Manchester United, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, and Schalke 04. And thanks to its unique location, Arsenal supporters that come from a variety of different classes. And as a result, Arsenal have a very diverse, wide range of supporters, and that makes Arsenal's fan base absolutely huge. And like all major clubs, they have a number of domestic supporter clubs, including the Arsenal Football Supporters Club, which works closely with the club, and the Independent Supporters Association. And of course, Arsenal have lots of fan base groups outside of London, including 24 UK supporter clubs, 37 Irish supporter clubs, and 49 other overseas supporter clubs were affiliated with the club. In a 2011 report, says Arsenal's global fan base is around 113 million people, which is absolutely massive, and it's one of the highest in world football. The Gunners have an absolutely massive fan base. Of course, the team does have its own anthem, of course. Their anthem, of course, is North London, the Angel, North London Forever by Lewis Dunford. And it's typically played at Arsenal home games before a match. So that is their club anthem, of course. And that song was written to his hometown of Islington, North London, and dedicated to Arsenal because the singer is a lifelong supporter of the club. It's Arsenal's home anthem, which is definitely pretty cool, though. One that connects to the club's unique fan base. So, pretty cool stuff. So, we're about to be arriving all the way in Bournemouth. We're not very far from our first stop here in Bournemouth. So, as we fly through the south coast into the countryside, we'll make our way over to Bournemouth, of course. I hope you guys are enjoying this. We stream multiple days. We stream 2 days a week, Fridays and Sundays. I have my Discord here if you guys want to join on in my Discord. We will count up in all our streams and content. This is where our series belongs. Really cool stuff, of course. So our next game day flight is going to be the Old Firm Derby in Glasgow. We're going to remain in the United Kingdom. We're just going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to go way up north. And we're going to cover Rangers and Celtic. Because this is a can't miss game, of course, of Scotland's two big clubs. And I'm looking forward to that, obviously, of Rangers and Celtic. Should be a really neat flight. And we'll dive into the world of Scottish football a bit as well, too. But it's Rangers and Celtic. The next question, though, is I'm going to have to compile more stuff this weekend on my own. So, we'll be making our way down here pretty soon. So, pretty cool stuff, of course. So, of course, Arsenal used to play at Highbury, actually. Highbury was their old ground, by the way, from 1913 to 2006. Was their old home. Now, actually, it's been turned into residential development, Highbury Square. So, they now turn it into an apartment complex. But that old stadium of the Gunners used to hold 38,000 at closure, but at its peak, it once hosted crowds up to 73,000 people. Of course, they had to cut down a lot of the seating because of the all-seating stuff that happened in the 90s. But yeah, it was the old home of the Gunners, of course. Very famous area. It was part of the 1948 Summer Olympics, as well as boxing, cricket, and cricket matches, baseball and cricket. So very important area in Highbury, the old home. So the city of Bournemouth, by the way, was around 196,000 people, the largest town in Dorset. This is a well-known coastal resort town. It was known for its Victorian architecture, the St. Peter's Church. Of course, it's home to its Bournemouth International Centre, one of the largest conferences venues for conferences in southern England. And it has its own local club too, AFC Bournemouth, which despite its age around 127 years, it only just made its Premier League debut pretty recently. In 2015 was their first time in the Premier League. But despite them being a small town and playing the smallest stadium in the Premier League, only 11,000 people play at the Vitality Stadium. They've been pretty successful hold into the Premier League, and they're still doing quite well in the Premier League. They're ninth in the league, so they're doing pretty decently. And they're off to a pretty good stretch of games so far in the Premier League. So yeah, Bournemouth are doing quite well for themselves. And their nickname, of course, is the Cherries. That is their club nickname. So pretty cool stuff from little known AFC Bournemouth. So we'll be making our way to the Vitality Stadium, of course, the home of AFC Bournemouth, and we'll head to Bournemouth Airport. Now Bournemouth, I know, is a major resort town, of course. It has its own pier and stuff, and tons of little shops. In pier, of course. And of course, it has its own little airport, Bournemouth Airport. It's mainly used for the low-cost airliners, Ryanair, TUI Airways, and Jet2.com. All use Bournemouth Airport for a lot of their flights to low-cost destinations and resort areas. So here's Bournemouth. Here is the city of Bournemouth. So there's Bournemouth. All this was lying down the town. So there's all that Bournemouth, of course. And there's the Vitality Stadium down here. So there is our first stop. The Vitality Stadium here in Bournemouth. So we'll fly here, turn left, and we'll make our first stop at 08. Now, of course, from there, we'll talk about the rest about the Gunners, and of course, we'll talk a bit, then we'll talk a little bit about Spurs as well. So there it is, the Vitality Stadium. Yeah, it's only 11,000 people. It's the smallest stadium in the Premier League. It's actually probably it is the second smallest stadium to actually ever be in the Premier League. The only one smaller is Luton Town's Kenilworth Road is the smallest one at just 10,000 people. Which is pretty crazy to think about, if you think about this long and hard enough. So we're going to go ahead and descend. The nice thing about this point, of course, it can be gliding, so it's pretty light, so you can just land really easily. Also has a bit of a speed brake too, so this thing can stop really quickly. But I don't think we're gonna have any trouble getting this thing down. So we're gonna go ahead and deploy the first stage of laps. So, beautiful stunning trip. I like the sunset though too. So here we go. We're going to make our landing here. And she's down. Pretty, like, it's a really easy plane to get up and get going. I like this little pipistrel. Really neat GA aircraft, and we'll park here for the time being. So we'll just stop here for just a minute. We'll get here to park. So we'll sit here for just a little bit to prepare for our next leg. So we'll be getting ready to get going in just about a minute for our next leg. We'll be heading our way down to a little grass strip, Echo Golf Oscar India. So we'll go ahead and prepare for the next leg pretty shortly. So we'll go ahead and get ready to get going. Take off the parking brake. And we'll just fly here pretty soon. So here we go. So we're going to continue to make our way over to Southampton, just 18 nautical miles is the beautiful city of Southampton, which I've visited before. And I'll be heading back there in April. But the city of Southampton, of course, is one of England's most important port cities. In fact, this was actually the departure point of the Titanic, which sadly sunk in the mid North Atlantic. And it was also a very important area for a lot of ocean liners. Southampton is home to some of the largest cruise ships in the world, are often docked here at Southampton. So, and of course, Jane Austen also lived in this city for quite a few years. So really cool stuff. Southampton's home to the Tudor House Museum, which opened back in which reopened in 2011. Very popular area. They also have the Mayflower Theatre, the largest theater in southern England, and of course, its port is massive, perfect for ocean and cruise shipping. A lot of cruise lines like to operate out of Southampton. In terms of sports, they're home to the biggest club, one of the biggest clubs in South England, Southampton Football Club, the Saints. They currently play in the second division of England, but they're actually had a period of domestic success over the years. So pretty big, and they're well known for their rivalry with Portsmouth, and it's one of the most bitter in England. So in its own right. So we'll get to Southampton shortly. So our slides here. Their mascot, of course, is the Gunnersaurus. Is their mascot, Gunnersaurus Rex, a 7-foot tall green dinosaur. And it first appeared in 1994 in a match against Manchester City. And it was based on a drawing from 11-year-old Pierre Lovell. And the same performer has actually been in the suit from the start. Jerry Quay is the performer in the Gunnersaurus Rex. So yeah, the Arsenal Gunners have their own mascot. Their owner, by the way, is American sports tycoon Stan Kroenke, who also owns the NFL's Los Angeles Rams. He also owns the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Colorado Rapids of the MLS. And also have been an extremely popular club in pop culture due to their proximity to the Alexandria Palace transmitter. Also appeared in mini media first. Their match in 1927 on January 22nd against Sheffield United was the first English league match to be broadcast live on radio. And a decade later, was the first football match in the world to be televised live. That's right, Arsenal had made first with television. As one of the most successful teams in the country, Arsenal have often featured when football is depicted in arts in Britain. In one of the earliest football-related novels at the time, The Arsenal Stadium Mystery was made into a film the same year, storied on a friendly match between Arsenal and Amberside. Of course, Arsenal in the 70s and 80s have been stereotyped as a boring and defensive side as well, and it was mainly featured in the Full Monty in 1997. Pretty cool though. Arsenal got a long history. Here's their club honors, by the way. Arsenal have won many of those during their time in the English Football League. their 13 first division titles are actually second or third behind the two clubs tied at first. That being, of course, in terms of their total first division titles, they won 13 of them. Which means they're, in terms of total titles, they're tied with second behind Liverpool, Manchester United with 20 top-flight English titles. They've won the FA Cup record 14 times, ahead of some of the other major clubs. And that they have won more than Manchester United, and still considerably ahead of their London rivals Chelsea and Tottenham, who they have only 8 of them. Arsenal have won the EFL Cup twice. They've won the Community Shield 17 times, which is only second behind Manchester United. And of course, Arsenal did win the Sanitary Cup. However, in Europe, Arsenal aren't quite nearly successful, as again, you saw the Winners' Cup and the Interseas Fair Cup. So, like I said, the Gunners don't have quite nearly the European resume. Domestically, they're one of the big clubs in England. European football, not so much. So, that's something I do want to tell you. Before we get started, Spurs, we're going to fly over Southampton for a bit, and then we'll head our way to Portsmouth next. And we'll talk about some of Arsenal's greatest players. Of course. Like I said, this is going to be a very action-packed coast, so we're going to be flying through many landmarks. So Southampton will be coming up next. You guys all know that this is a major port city. So there it is, Southampton, everyone. So there is photogrammetry. Will be, and yes, you guys might be able to see a cruise ship down here, because yes, this is a very popular cruising area, of course. So we can see some beautiful cruise ships. You guys can take your cruises into Southampton, of course. I'll be in one of those, obviously. So here's Southampton. All those ships. And there's St. Mary's Stadium here. That's the home of Southampton, the Saints. Saints play there in Southampton's St. Mary's Stadium. So there's there's the home of the Saints. So yeah, they play here. So that's where Southampton FC plays. Right ahead of us. We'll turn left here very shortly. We'll turn right. 121 degrees. So now let's talk briefly about Arsenal's greatest talents. Obviously, their greatest player, in my honest opinion, is, of course, Arsenal's legendary Thierry Henry. The greatest player in Premier League history and one of the GOATs of Arsenal. he should have won a Ballon d'Or during his time at Arsenal, and he should have been a Ballon d'Or winner. But he's Arsenal's greatest talent. I mean, he's their all-time goal-scoring king, and played for the club from 1999 to 2007. Then, of course, you have David O'Leary, who's made the most appearances in Arsenal history, and one of the great defenders, and definitely a club icon for the Gunners. Of course, he's one of the, and he still is a club ambassador at the club. Then you have Ian Wright, not only one of Arsenal's greatest goal scoring machines, but he's also a really well liked pundit as well. But he truly became an absolute star for the Gunners. Came here from Crystal Palace and became a major star for the club. Then afterwards as well, we have Dennis Bergkamp, a major piece of the Gunners' success throughout their Premier League era under Arsene Wenger, and he became one of the greatest Dutch players of all time. Part of the top FIFA 100 greatest living players selected by Pele himself. And truly he became the stud he is today at Arsenal. A massive club icon. Then you have Tony Adams. And of course you have Tony Adams as part of this list too. Big major player. David Seaman, one Arsenal's most well-known goalkeeper, the well-known iconic goalkeeper of Arsenal during the 90s. Then you have Robin van Persie, major piece of Arsenal from 2004 to 2012, was one of the great Dutch stars of the game, of course, but he really grew into one of Arsenal's leading goal-scoring machines during his time with the Gunners. Then you have one of the more recent stars, Bukayo Saka, one of their newer up-and-coming stars for the Gunners. Saka, born from London, of course, and he is one of the best wingers in the world for his creativity, dribbling, and work rate. A hard-working guy and a beloved player. And then, of course, Patrick Vieira was a major stud for this club during his time with the Gunners, and was a big piece of their dominant Invincibles team. And of course, there are so many Arsenal legends. Where do we even begin with the Gunners? They have so many of them to pick. I mean, you can go Theo Walcott if you wanted to pick one. Cliff Baston's one of those as well for older players. Oh yeah, Tony Adams, by the way, is one of the great. And Tony Adams, by the way, I did forget about him for a bit. He's Mr. Arsenal. He's played his entire career at the club. He's Mr. Arsenal. And he helped Arsenal win trophies in 3 different decades. And he's definitely Arsenal's one of their more iconic players. So that covers the Gunners for a bit. Arsenal's a huge club, massive fan base. Here's the crazy thing. I did almost consider supporting Arsenal. However, I felt Everton were a more likely club. And don't worry, I will get to Everton at some point. I will cover the Toffees at some point. Don't worry. Maybe I can sneak in the Merseyside Derby. So, this is Portsmouth, by the way. Now, if you guys don't know about Portsmouth, for any of you all that may not know about Portsmouth, this city has had a rich naval history since the Roman times, but this was especially important as it was one of the major naval bases of the British Empire. This was Britain's main naval sea base, the world's oldest dry dock that was rebuilt in 1698, and this was where the heart of the British Empire's navy came into existence. And it's the world's greatest naval port. And of course, Portsmouth has some really great landmarks. Of course, the big one is their port. Fort Nelson is a big one. Of course, the HMS Warrior, the Spinnaker Tower. Of course, the world's oldest naval ship still in commission is also here too, HMS Victory. So, if we look to our right, here's Spinnaker Tower. Here's some of the old ships still here. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a bit. So over to our right is some of the old naval ships still here in Portsmouth. I do apologize that there's some of the aircraft carriers. But yes, this is Portsmouth. Very important city here in the south coast of England. So there's Spinnaker Tower, of course. Really important stuff here. Right here, of course, we're going to be flying over Fratton Park. That's the home of Portsmouth FC. Of course, people call them Pompeii. Pompeii is actually the club nickname, by the way. Now, I've heard an interesting story how they got that nickname, by the way. Portsmouth FC's famous nickname, Pompeii. Well, their famous nickname, of course, is traced back to the history of Portsmouth as in its Royal Naval Base. And the exact origins unknown, but so there is Fratton Park, home of Portsmouth FC. And Fratton Park has been one of England's most cherished stadiums, of course. It's a very historic ground. So we're going to head over east, and we'll head our way over to Brighton, of course. So for this one, of course, we'll be talking about Spurs in just a second. We'll start talking about Tottenham Hotspur, North London's other massive club, Spurs. So now Spurs, of course, originated back in 1892 as Hotspur FC. Spurs have been competing in Tottenham ever since 1882. They've been playing at the Hotspur Stadium since 2019. Founded back in 1882, Tottenham Hotspur's emblem is a cockerel standing upon a football with the Latin motto, Audere est facere, to dare is to do. And they traditionally wore their white shirts and navy blue shorts since 1898-99. They won the FA Cup for the first time in 1901, the only non-league club to do so. And Tottenham was also the first club in the 20th century to achieve at league and FA Cup double, winning both competitions in the 1960 and 61 season. And they even became the first British club to win a UEFA club competition, winning the European Cup Winners' Cup that year, as well as the inaugural winners of the UEFA Cup in 1972. And they collected at least one major trophy in the 6 decades from the 50s to 2000s, only rivaled by Manchester United. In Spurs, they've won only 2 league titles, 8 FA Cups, 4 League Cups, and 7 Community Shields. In European football, they won a Cup Winners' Cup and 3 UEFA Cup such Europa League titles. And yes, they won one this past year. Last year, they won a Europa League. And of course, they were so close to win the Champions League in 2018-2019, but they lost to Liverpool, of course. And they're one of the world's most valuable football clubs, valued at $3.2 billion. So Spurs, massive history, of course, long history, and rich traditions. So, big deal for Spurs. Of course, they play in the brand new, state-of-the-art Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. This is a bleeding-edge modern stadium, replacing their old historic home, White Hart Lane. With 62,000 fans, it is the 3rd largest football stadium in England and the largest club ground in London. And it's not just used for football games, for the soccer. It's also used for the NFL International Series games. It features the world's first dividing retractable synthetic turf pitch. And it took several years to build, but man, it was a glorious stadium. Now the name was supposed to be temporary, however, they haven't found a sponsor yet. but this is a bleeding edge stadium. And one of the really cool things about Hotspur Stadium is their stands, with 4 distinct stands, and they're set to angles up to 35 degrees. However, the big stand that a lot of people know is their south stand, which is their unique home ground, which is the largest single team stand in England. 17,000 fans sit at the south stand. And it's influenced by Borussia Dortmund's yellow wall of their stadium, Westfalen Stadion. But a super modern stadium, it has this stadium has world-class facilities, some of the nicest in all of Europe, if not the world. And they play in a massive stadium. And it's not just host for football games, it's hosted Champions League games, it's hosted the NFL International Series, it's hosted rugby matches. It's hosted tons of concerts, boxing, and it's even been used as a go-kart track. Yes, it's hosted just about everything you could think of, and it's a really neat stadium. Of course, Hotspur Stadium, one of the absolute modern marvels. It's a brilliant venue for home matches. Of course, their unique crest is very unique. Of course, their crest is one of the most iconic in English football. Their crest, since the 1921 FA Cup final, the Tottenham Hotspur crest featured a cockerel, and its name is Harry Hotspur, after who the club was named. Was said to have been given the nickname Hotspur as he dug his spurs to make his horse go faster in charge in the battles. And spurs were also associated with fighting chickens. The club used spurs as a symbol in 1900, which then evolved into a stand of a cockerel stand on a football. And ever since then, it's been used as part of the club's identity. And this badge was first used on a shirt in 1921. In 1983, to overcome unauthorized pirate merchandising, the club's badge was altered by adding 2 red heraldic lines to flank the shield, which came from the Northumberland family. And this device played for about 3 seasons as well for the 90s. And of course, in 2006, they rebranded it again to modernize the club's image, and is replaced by a more professionally designed logo, featuring a more sleeker and elegant cockerel on old-time football. So that is their famous crest, and this one here is one of their original ones they used all the way back in the day, of course. It was their old crest that was used way back in the day for Spurs. Of course. And speaking of their kits, of course, the white and navy blue has been a part of it since 1883. Originally, they used a quarter kit. However, what changed the club to what it is now was during the 1898-99 season, during their final year at Northumberland Parks, the club switched colors to white shirts and blue shorts, the same choice as Preston North End, and they've been remaining the colors ever since at Tottenham Hotspurs, giving the club the nickname the Lily Whites, which is their well-known nickname, of course. And then in 1921, they added the famous cockerel. The year they won the FA Cup, they added the cockerel badge, a club crest that's been on their shirt ever since, and Spurs became the first major club to have its club crest on a player's shirt on every match apart from the Warriors. And that is pretty much how their design has been. It hasn't changed all that much. The white, navy, blue has not been changed all that much ever since. So pretty iconic kits. Their sponsor ever since 2014 has been AIA, which is based in Hong Kong and is the largest life insurance group in the Asia Pacific region. And their main uniform sponsor and their main kit manufacturer is Nike, ever since 2017, of course. So very iconic kits, and they're definitely pretty well known in the English game. In terms of their supporters, Tottenham Hotspur have a massive fan base in the United Kingdom, drawn mainly from the North London in the home counties. The attendance figures for its home matches, however, have fluctuated over the years. At one point, they used to have some of the highest attendance in England from 1950 to 1962. And then, of course, was 9th for the 2008-9 Premier League season and 11th for all Premier League seasons between 1992 to 2011. And there have been many official supporter clubs from around the world, while independent supporter clubs and trusts has been recognized by the club as a represented body for supporters. However, one interesting thing about Tottenham Hotspur, and something that has made this pretty unique for their club, has been Jewish support. You see, Tottenham Hotspur is actually used to have historically, they had a significant Jewish following for the Jewish communities in East and North London, with around a third of their supporters estimated to be Jewish in the 1930s. Due to this early support, all three chairmen of the club since 1984 have been Jewish businessmen with prior history of supporting the club. Now, of course, nowadays, the club doesn't have as much Jewish contingent anymore of its fans, though it's still identified as a Jewish club by rival fans. So, as a result, there's been a lot of anti-Jewish chants at the club, directed at the club and supported by rival fans since the 60s. Of course, nowadays, Spurs have tried to distance itself a bit from all that, but still to this day, of course, that stigma hasn't exactly gone away from all the anti-Semitic chanting and stuff. Of course, there's been a number of songs associated with the club, but the most famous one that's sung by Spurs supporters are Glory Glory Tottenham Hotspur, which originated back in 1961 after their famous double. And their song became the main anthem of Tottenham Hotspur. And the last slide before we end up going to our last slide, and that would be our last slide for this leg, of course. We'll get ready to go get some rest, of course. So we're about to arrive into Brighton, of course. So Brighton, of course, is a very famous seaside community, of course, major resort area. Brighton's been extremely popular nowadays as a health resort for sea bathing. And of course, it's been a seaside resort ever since the Georgian era, has been since the 19th century. However, Brighton has made it very popular for tourists, especially for its large LGBT population and its recognition as the unofficial gay capital of the United Kingdom. So as a result, Brighton is a major center for the LGBT community. They have some pretty cool landmarks. The Palace Pier, the Brighton Marine Palace Pier in 1899. Became a well-known pleasure pier. It has its own observation tower, the Brighton Eye 360, which is even taller than the London Eye. It's the highest observation tower outside of London. And more. Some really cool stuff, tons of beaches, of course. And Brighton's also the home to its own football club, Brighton and Hove Albion, the Seagulls. Which is a club with a fascinating history, of course. The Seagulls have had a very fascinating history. At one point, they were in the fourth tier of English football and had financial issues, and they barely saved themselves from liquidation by avoiding relegation in 1997. They actually saved the club. And Brighton then got back to the second tier. And then, of course, they made it to the Premier League for the very first time in 2017, making their first trip into the Premier League for the first time ever. And of course, they've been still in the Premier League ever since. They haven't left. And one time, they even made it to 6 in the Premier League for Europa League. Yes, Brighton and Hove Albion. It's crazy how much things can change within a whole 2 decades. And they played at a really nice stadium, Falmer Stadium, which is a really nice ground, obviously, too. So we'll follow on the coast. This is we're about to head into Brighton. What a beautiful flavor on the coast. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7. Still got one. So here's the Brighton I-360 tower. Brighton, there is a couple of factories and stuff. So ahead of us is going to be the Brighton 360. I think we can see it on our... So there's more factory stuff. I think we can see the I-3... Yeah, there's the I-360 tower here in Brighton. We will be heading north as we head our way up into the skybox, of course. But really cool stuff, Brighton. Pretty neat club. They have a bit of an up and down. Yeah, welcome to Brighton, everyone. Beautiful little city. Beautiful little resort area. So yeah, there's the Brighton I-360, the observation tower. Beautiful flight in Brighton, of course. So we're going to head over to west. Cool. So for my plans for the weekend, of course, my plans this weekend, I'm planning on a transatlantic flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Dublin tomorrow. Should be a bit of a long flight. So we're about to arrive into Brighton's home ground. Should be easy to spot within the hills. I think there it is. American Express Stadium, home of the Seagulls. So you have a beautiful little stadium here in the hillside. Welcome to Brighton Hove Albion, the home of the Seagulls. Now, of course, you guys don't even realize this, but Brighton's biggest rival isn't even in the South Coast. It's actually in South of London, unbelievably. Crystal Palace is their biggest rival. So we're about to turn into so this one's a bit of a grass strip for this one, so we're going to make our landing here. So Autopilot off, flight director, and we can descend. Here's a tip: we can easily stop this, slow down this thing. Yep, this thing has air brake. And we can slow this down like a rock if we needed to. So yeah, that's how you slow down a... That's basically how you slow down a plane like this. Like I said, one of the nice things about this plane is it's super light, so it can take off really quickly. So here we go. Let's land. We'll turn left. It's actually an air... air brake, and pretty much stop right there. Here we go. We'll park here. So yeah, we're in the English countryside right now. We'll take a bit of a break here for just a little bit. Beautiful view of the English countryside. So we'll stay here for just a minute or two as we get going along. So now, of course, we'll be preparing for our last leg into London, of course. 57 nautical miles. We don't really have too much left to go. So I think we're going to get ready to get going. We want to get there before nighttime. So let's go ahead and get going for our last leg of the day. Let's see how quickly we can take off here. Stole. Let's see the stole forwards this thing. So our direction should be 353 degrees. And wow, that is how you do stole in this plane. So let's go ahead and, as we fly up to 1,500 feet, we'll talk about our final 2 slides for our stream. Let's cover them as we head up to 1,500 feet. So in terms of honors, they only won the league title twice in their history. In 1950-51, in 1960-61 was their only times they've won the top flight title. They've yet to win a Premier League title. In fact, they won it while being newly promoted. During that year they won their first title, Everton got relegated to the 2nd division, and that would be the last time Everton have ever been relegated. Was 1950-51 was their last season ever relegated. Pretty crazy though, as well. They've won the FA Cup 8 times, most recently in 1990. They won the League Cup 4 times, most recently in 2007-8. They've won the Community Shield 7 times. And then European Cups, they won a Cup Winners' Cup in 1962. And then, of course, they won the Europa League 3 times, including the most recent one in 2024-2025 in Bilbao. Of course, there are many well-known players in Tottenham Hotspur's rich history. And Spurs have so many well-known players throughout their history, of course. And of course, as one of England's big clubs, Tottenham Hotspur have fielded some incredible talented stars. But if I had to pick the greatest Tottenham Hotspur player in the modern era, there is only one player that I think stands above the rest in the modern era. Harry Kane, one of England's greatest talents in the modern era. Harry Kane played for Tottenham Hotspur from 2009 to 2023, backed 213 goals for Spurs. He's their club's all-time leading goal scorer. He's been an absolute score machine and has been a big part of the Spurs throughout pretty much his era. Though now he's playing for Bayern Munich, and he's been extremely strong at Bayern. 88 goals in 85 appearances at Bayern Munich. He's been incredible and he finally won his first trophy ever in 2024, finally winning his first trophy. But that being said, though, Harry Kane, absolute club icon, one of their greatest players. And of course, another club icon has been his longtime teammate, Son Heung-min, has been one of the greatest Asian talents in history. Is widely regarded as the greatest Asian player of all time and one of Tottenham's most well-liked players. Of course, he joined Tottenham Hotspur from Bayer Leverkusen in 2015. And he's become since one of their big icons. In 333 appearances, he scored 127 goals for Spurs domestically. And of course, his total goals for the club was 173. But he became a major piece for Spurs during his time, getting them close to a Champions League final in 2018. And he finally helped in his 17-year title drought in 2025 in his final season at Spurs, helping win a Europa League title. But Son Heung-min, however, is now in the MLS, Los Angeles FC. But he's been a very popular and well-liked player for Spurs. Of course, then you have Steve Perryman. One of their next great players is Steve Perryman. He is their all-time leading in club appearances. And he played for pretty much Tottenham Hotspur from 1969 to 1986, with total appearances at the club and 854 total appearances at Tottenham Hotspur. He's their all-time most caps players at Tottenham Hotspur. And definitely was a big piece during their 70s and 80s, winning the FA Cup, League Cup, and UEFA Cup all twice during his 17 years at the club. Then, of course, the next player here is Jimmy Greaves. He's second all-time in their goal scorer and was a big part of Tottenham's great talents. He's one of England's best ever players, Jimmy Greaves. He's their 5th highest international goal scorer for England, and he's Hotspur's second highest all-time goal scorer. And he's also the highest goal scorer in the history of English top-flight football, 357 goals. And he even came third in the Ballon d'Or in 1963. But he's definitely one of England's all-time great talents, but he especially became a star during his time in Tottenham. It was a big piece. And unfortunately, he couldn't be there during their double, but he still played a big role for Spurs during the 1960s. So Jimmy Greaves, definitely one of the all-time great talents in English football. Then you have Gary Maboot, who's also second in the total club appearances, and he was a really well-known star for Tottenham Hotspur. Despite being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, he got to play in 619 games at Spurs. And he was a big part as their team captain for 11 years as a team captain. But definitely an icon for Spurs. Then you have Pat Jennings, of course, is definitely Tottenham's most well-known goalkeeper. as one of the greatest goalkeepers in the history of the sport, Pat Jennings. He was nominated for the Ballon d'Or 3 separate occasions in 1973, 1975, and 1985, and he played internationally for Northern Ireland. Which is pretty impressive, though, for his career, but he had an excellent career in club football. Also, apparently, he's also one of the few players who made the cross the bridge from Tottenham to Arsenal. So yeah, making one of the few players who made the bridge jump from here. Then you have Cliff Jones. Another well-known player is Cliff Jones. He is one of the greatest Welsh talents. He was the last surviving player from the Welsh team in the 1958 World Cup. Which was Wales's debut in the World Cup. And that Welsh team made it to the quarterfinals, but he was one of their top goal scorers, of course. And he came in for Tottenham as part from Swansea Town. Or what is now known as Swansea City, but definitely well-known Welsh star, one of their big wingers. Then you have Glenn Hoddie, a really talented midfielder. He now works as a pundit for TNT Sports, but he was well known for his time at Tottenham. He also played for Monaco, Chelsea, and Swindon Town as well, but he was pretty well known during his playing career and was well known for his gifted and creative talents, for his balance, control, and passing and vision abilities. He was a very versatile player during his time at Tottenham. And then, of course, then you have Bobby Smith, another iconic player for Spurs. Bobby Smith was another well-known talent for the club. And he was actually their third leading all-time goal scorer, and he played from 1955 to 1964, of course. And he was a big piece for their team. He was a big piece for their double-winning season. He was the integral part of Bill Nicholson's double-winning Tottenham team in 1961. And for the finale, of course, well, it turns out, and there, of course, there's plenty more iconic talents of Tottenham Hotspur over the years. So that basically covers the last part of, that's our last slide for today, guys. So yes, we finally covered our final slide. So that covers it. So that is the history of Tottenham Hotspur. So let's go look at some of the club websites for a bit. So for streaming links, So these are the two links for Spurs and for Spurs and stuff. So here's Arsenal FC first. So this is the Gunners website. This is Arsenal.com, the home of the Gunners. So this is Arsenal's website. But yeah, this is a pretty big match because here's the thing. If Arsenal somehow loses to Spurs on Sunday, this could be really bad, because if they lose to Spurs, well, if Arsenal loses to Spurs somehow, this would be a huge loss for them, because if Manchester City were to win, well, they would only be 3 points back from the Gunners, and they would only be 2 points back from Arsenal, and they could overtake them. And Arsenal supporters do not want the Gunners to choke again. So, pretty big game, of course. You can learn about there's their shop. And then there's different websites. You have different memberships. So if you were to join a membership, you get to be a member of Arsenal. So if you choose your red membership, choose red, you have access to Arsenal experiences, ticket access, your 10% off retail in-store, and ticket exchange. So you got different experiences you can attend during your time at Arsenal. During the Arsenal experiences for prize draws, change away match experience, or merchandise. Then you have one for the history of the club. You have all the different eras, of course. The glory years of, for example, you can go to the Wenger years and follow their greatest manager, Arsene Wenger, who's their greatest manager ever. And you can go learn about the Invincibles, the team that stunned the world, shocked the world for doing it. And then you can learn some of their heritage. You can learn about Highbury, their old historic ground. Or you can learn more about, well, the badge and the crest. And of course, they got the Steam tours. So you can go into Arsenal and you can check out the Steam tours. Of course, most of their tours are self-guided, of course. They're all self-guided. And it's for £33, but it's pretty cool. It's actually $43 though. But Arsenal, free entry, free Arsenal brand earphones, full opportunity with the iconic trophy for an additional cost, and more. But really cool stuff getting to Arsenal, and of course you can go to their shop to buy their iconic red and white kits, let's see if they got one for 3X. Okay, they do have one for 3X. I shop tariff free so I can get me a 3X Arsenal kit for the Gunners. Of course, you can get all their retro stuff too, including some of their home shirts from the 1990s and stuff. So, and of course, scarves. Can't go wrong with an Arsenal scarf. So that is the Gunners for a bit. Arsenal definitely have some really cool stuff. Now here's Spurs, of course. Let's go over Spurs briefly. So this is Spurs. You have your different website. You got your fans. You can do the Steam, of course. And you can learn more about Hotspur Stadium, of course, the modern ground. You can do upcoming events, stadium map, ground regulations. You can go look at the club and look at their history, their charity, their heritage trail. All that sort of stuff about the club. Here's its history section. So all about their history of Tottenham and their club legends. Robbie Keane as well. Gary Lineker played. Bill Nicholson. I think Harry Kane and Son Heung-min's going to come here in the future. And of course, they also have their own shop. And you can get all their stuff. So you can get their kits, their famous lily white kits that everyone knows of. Tottenham Hotspur's beautiful kits. Of course, you can get their retro stuff, and of course, you got your scarves too. So lots of really cool stuff. They got. You can get a Heung-min's son player scarf for $8 because he's no longer at the club. But they got some really cool stuff here too. So yeah, that covers the last slides, and these are Spurs. That will basically be it. So we'll just exit that out. So we're about to arrive into the nation's capital city of London. To our southwest, we should see Selhurst Park. That is the home of Brighton's most bitter rival, Crystal Palace. And if you're wondering why Crystal Palace and Brighton are rivals, I know a lot of people don't. If you're wondering why the heck these two are rivals between Brighton and, despite not being near each other, it's still a rivalry. Well, I'll give you a little bit of a brief story about how this became to be. This derby came to be back in 1920. However, the derby didn't really start until the 1970s, and that's where the derby really started between Brighton and Crystal Palace. In fact, that's how Brighton's famous nickname, the Seagulls, actually originated. That's how Brighton's official nickname came out. You see, Brighton were originally known as the Dolphins, believe it or not. But during one famous match, of course, in the 1970s, the Crystal Palace fans chanted, known as the Seagulls. In Glasgow, they called them the Seagulls. They did Seagulls as a chant to Palace Eagles, and they chanted Seagulls, and it became their nickname ever since. But these two are pretty bitter rivals, and it's only got more intense since Brighton joined the Premier League and all that. It's become even more intense between these two. And this rivalry has become a very big deal nowadays. So definitely a very underrated English football rivalry. Very underrated. So guys, welcome to London. And man, she looks amazing in this new sim. Looks amazing on this system, of course. Beautiful London, everyone. So, very excited for this derby coming up. A big team, of course, with tons at stake here. Who knows, if Spurs win and they manage to knock out the Gunners, then guess what? That means Tottenham could avoid relegation. So Tottenham, the Spurs need to win this game. It's a must-win. It's a derby matchup, and you can't lose. So looking across to our left, there's West London here. I've been in this area before. I think I can see Stamford Bridge all the way from here. I think that's Stamford Bridge. That's the home of Chelsea. And we'll get to Chelsea at some point, too. Maybe I'll do the Everton-Chelsea match at the end of the year and fly from Liverpool down to London. Make our way to Chelsea. And we'll probably end in Heathrow. But London's got tons of clubs. Besides the big three of Arsenal, Chelsea, and Spurs, they also got other clubs. The west side has Fulham, Queen's Park Rangers, and Brentford. South London, of course, has Crystal Palace. East London has West Ham and Millwall. And of course, that's just downtown London. They got more in the other areas. So guys, we're about to make our way to downtown London. I'm going to slow this plane down a bit and slow her down, because we're going to be flying over Buckingham Palace and all that stuff. We were going to get a stunning view. And look at this, guys. Well, what a stunning picture of London. Holy hell. Sorry about cussing, man. But holy heck, what a beautiful picture of London. Holy heck, that's a beautiful picture of London if I ever see one. So here it is. Buckingham Palace and all that. Look at that for a screenshot, man. That's gorgeous. We're going to go ahead and I may hand fly this area. So I've been to many of these places already. We did a taxi tour. So there's Buckingham Palace. There's the Westminster building. This is the Parliament building. We also visited the Westminster Abbey, which is not far. That's a gorgeous religious building. There's the London Eye, which we visited here too. But no, I loved my time visiting London. I really did. It was big and busy, but I really enjoyed exploring Europe. So there's Westminster Abbey. There's all that here in downtown London. The London Eye. Really cool buildings, of course. So many amazing pictures, obviously, of London. London looks great in the new sim. Looks fantastic. So we'll head over east, of course. We visited Hyde Park as well. That's also a really pretty area, is Hyde Park. Of course, Kensington Palace is a big one. I got to visit Kensington. Really beautiful. Like, London's such a cool city. Lots of history here. Really, really enjoyed my time in London. And of course, you guys all know this cathedral, St. Paul's, which was absolutely stunning cathedral. Um, Here's, but I mean, look at all the buildings here. Man, London looks so good in this new sim. London looks amazing. There's St. Paul's Cathedral. Oh, London looks wonderful in this sim. It looks amazing. Oh man, this is just great. Hey, Red Bear, good to see you. We're about the tail end of the stream. We're visiting. We're preparing for the North London Derby. Spurs and Arsenal. There's the shard and all that, man. This is absolutely wonderful. Isn't this pretty? There's the Tower of London. And the Tower Bridge. Oh man, this is just pretty. Oh man, London is so nice. Man, this is wonderful. Four, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're gonna head up to Arsenal's Hotspur. We're gonna visit the home ground of Arsenal. We're gonna head to Emirates Stadium, home of the Gunners. Man, this is absolutely gorgeous. We're gonna see a Red Baron. So we're doing the game day flight for Sunday's match. The North London Derby should be a massive game, of course. So Emirates Stadium isn't too much farther. So we're just gonna go continue this heading. So North London, we'll be heading our way over. But man, this has been really nice. We started all the way back in the south coast from Plymouth. We made our way to Exeter, Bournemouth, Southampton, then go to Portsmouth, Brighton, and then from there head north into London. But I wanted to take a scenic coast down England's south coast, which I wanted to do, and it's absolutely wonderful. So guys, here we are, our first of our 2 grounds. We visit Emirates Stadium, the home of Arsenal since 2006. The proud home of the Gunners, of course. Now, if you guys want to ask me personally which of the 2 North London teams I would cheer for, I would say I would support Spurs, actually, is who I would support in the North London Derby. I just think Arsenal is not my type of club. No offense to the Gunners, but I would pick Spurs. I have more of a connection for Spurs. This would be better. So there, right here is Highbury. This used to be the home ground of Arsenal. But I decided I wanted to do a fly around so I could get both of the Arsenal's old grounds. So there's the Gunners, of course, Arsenal. So yeah, 60,000 people play there, and there's Arsenal's old ground, which is now turned into an apartment complex. So that's where we're heading to. We're going to go into the home of Spurs. So now we're here into Tottenham. I don't think Spurs Stadium is sadly not in the sim, which it should be because it's one of London's most beautiful stadiums, of course. Maybe it's here. I don't know. We're heading further north into London. So, Hotspur Stadium may not be here, but I think White Hart Lane would be here. Oh, I know what's happened. Yeah, we're about to reach the end of the UK's photogrammetry in London. We're about to reach the very end of it. So, sadly, it's not photogrammetry. But there is Hotspur Stadium. It's just not 3D modeled. I think we're just about to reach the end. Yeah, this is just about the end of London's photogrammetry. That's sad. So there's Hotspur Stadium, of course. So yeah, we're just right around the. There is to do. Oh. So. So we're about to make our way to Stapleford for our last leg. So that's it, everyone. That covers it. That's all the pictures. So here we go. Stapleford, our last stop. So the old ground Spurs play, by the way, is called White Hart Lane. Was their old ground. Now, a bit of a story. It hosted Spurs from 1899 to 2017. When it was demolished, it was 36,000. But at one point, it used to have capacities nearly 80,000 people. So it used to have far more people, but nowadays it's only just 36,000. But there's some big memorable moments here. Of course, it's hosted many international football matches. It's also hosted to a baseball. Baseball used to play here. And of course, Michael Wilson used to be here as well. Several major boxing matches used to be at White Hart Lane and hosted American football. So pretty cool stuff. Of course, White Hart Lane, an old ground with a lot of history. So here we go. So here we go. Stapleford Airport. Echo Golf Sierra Golf. So this is our final stop. Here we go, guys. That's it. We'll park right here and we'll wrap up the stream. So beautiful landing here today. And off. So that's it, everyone. Welcome to Stapleford Airport, just north of London. So guys, thank you all so much for another great stream. This has been really enjoyable so far. So we're going to go ahead and find our next stream. So I think we're going to, MSFS officials here. So I think we're going to rate MSFS official, and we're going to say goodbye here. We'll be seeing you guys on Sunday at in Wyoming, of course. So take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your day, and have a great start to your weekend, everyone. Take care, everyone, and have a great day. Goodbye, everyone.